We are up to 37 at the moment.
Okay, thank you very
Impressive.
much.
Very good.
Could you please let me know when Teofil has joined?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
I don't know, I'm sending him a message now.
Yeah, we've done that.
You did it? Okay.
Carmen,
Speakers.
I know you would like to open. I'm going to mute myself. If you would like to contact me, just chat with me privately, and I will do the same. And I will let you know when Teofil joins.
Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Paula.
Hi.
How are you?
Hi.
Okay, I will start the meeting by introducing our guests today. And before everybody and everything else, I would like to thank you all for joining, for taking the time. And thank you, Andrew and Nadeem, for hosting this from Henley Business School, and for making yourselves available for the subject development, and also preparing the whole session with our distinguished guest speakers. I would like to introduce you today and thank again for their time. Mr. Radu Hanga, President of the Board of Directors. Thank you, Radu.
Thank you very much.
Looking forward to welcome Mr. Teofil Muresan, Chairman of the Board of Directors, E-INFRA, Electrogrup Infrastructure. And thank you very much, Mr. Valentin Radu, Chairman of the Board of Directors.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
We are looking forward to seeing you debating today the insights on the also challenging. I would like to mention that this meeting is recorded, and thank you for accepting that. And now I will pass the floor to Andrew to start the discussion with a short presentation, and yeah, we will continue after that. Thank you, Andrew. I would advise you, please mute yourselves, the other ones, after the Q&A session, otherwise we are going to have a microphone.
I think there is microphone on the meeting because I can hardly hear you.
Mm.
Can we all mute ourselves, and then when we want to speak, we can unmute it?
I just did that.
Thank you. Thank you. So welcome, everybody. Let me just throw a few thoughts and suggestions to especially our three speakers, Radu, Teo, and Valentin. Why should anybody have a board? Why is the role of chairman important if it is? And what sort of state are we in today? A little bit of background, a study a few years back that my wife Nada and I conducted of the FTSE 100, 200, 300, and what did we find? That whatever the board said about its performance and its contribution and its value, when we went to the managers who had something to do with the board, they didn't sit on the board, but they had to relate to the board, they underrated the performance of the board by 40% on average on every criteria.
Andrew, excuse me, allow me to say welcome to Teofil. Teofil, can you hear us?
Teofil not, but Marius, yes. Hello, everybody.
Hello, Marius.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Yeah, I can see that he's now connected, but I cannot hear him. Okay. So I'm sorry, Andrew, please continue.
No problem. So we had one piece of evidence that said that boards do not contribute much value. They don't have an added advantage. And yet governance is now becoming so critical. Let's go back in history. Where does the word chair come from? There are two interpretations. One is the French and the other is the English, and the English one sounds the more feasible. In 1750, when the financial markets or the money markets of London were as corrupt as they ever could be, the first comply and explain was drafted, and that was, if your contract with an investor was going to have any legal weight, one, you had to sign that contract in the investor's premises. So the people who had cash around 1750 were often tradespeople, making pots, selling pots all over the world. And because those premises may be full of all sorts of materials, a board of wood had to be taken, and usually it was the door, and it was put on two props, and on this board, the contract was signed. So that's how the term board came around. And the person who sat what was usually the only chair on the premises was the leader of the contract and the leader of the enterprise. And so we had the term chair. When did CEO become important? And as far as history can see, it was 1970. Lee Iacocca, pay me $1, all the rest is bonuses, share options, etc. I'll turn Chrysler around. So we've had about 220 years of chair, and until the dot-com crisis, we probably had 30 to 32 years of the hero CEO. And in our last 18 years or so, the role of CEO has been tainted. One, because of too many demands. Two, too many pressures. Three, too operational. So what is happening is that the role of CEO is slowly morphing into the role of Chief Operating Officer, but the chair is still there. So leading from the chair was historically, and now is coming back to be, a critical role. And what is the chair lead? Well, if we look at governance, governance is not quite accurate. The essence of governance is oversight. We have a company, a government department, a charity, we have a set of assets. And what we want to see is what value are these assets bringing in terms of their purpose and mission, and could we get better value if we restructure them, redesign them, reposition them another way. So the levers that any board can use is, number one, compliance. And we have gone overboard on compliance in probably every country. And the extent to which we rely on compliance so much is typified by the major corporate collapses. When you do a little exercise from Enron onwards of 6 months before the collapse, how did the press and media view that company? And you'll find almost the company, they viewed it as having outstanding governance, which meant outstanding compliance. And yet that compliance and disabled people, managers and the board members from being able to address and handle the company's problems. So what was the second lever? It was stewardship, it was guide, it was facilitate, it was clever think. And what's happening to us today is that the chair is the meeting point of both compliance and stewardship. It's the meeting point of how and where and when we determine competitive advantage and differentiation, and reflect on our social purpose, on our mission, reflect on the ethics that we have. So what seems to be emerging today is that the chair is the principal point of leadership. So some of the questions I would like to ask our three presenters. Do you have to be really smart for this job? What's the intellectual demands for a job such as this? Is this totally a political job? Think of all the misalignments that you have to negotiate through, and yet you still have to engage. Engagement or not is not a question. Engage you must. but the misalignments continue to be there. How tough do you have to be? What's the level of resilience like to be able to face some of these pressures and challenges day by day? What, if you like, is one of your principal contributions? Is it to clarify strategy? Is it actually to determine what's happening to us today, almost clarify the challenges we've got so people can move forward? Is it actually to remind us of the conscience that we need to have in order to guide this enterprise forward? And in all that, how do we use evidence in order to proceed in the way that we want? Can I leave you, and especially our three speakers, with one or two thoughts? If we didn't have a board, where would we go to resolve issues? So one thing that I think we can say is that the board is the ultimate point of resolution of dilemmas. And who actually leads that? It's the chair. Now, if anybody has had to face a dilemma, you'll find in reality, it's very painful. There is no answer. It is emotionally stretching and may damage you. But may I suggest to you that one of the privileges of being a chair is to have dilemmas. It is the ultimate challenge and privilege of leadership. Because if you as the chair were not there, and neither was the board, the only place we can go to is the courts. And we don't want to go to court. We want to go to another body that at least will help us work through some of the challenges. So for me, a background. The most important executive role in the corporate hierarchy has been the chair, whether we call it executive or non-executive today. Number two, the social purpose of the firm and its economic reality are now intermingled, as we've seen with this coronavirus crisis. Number three, if you do not act upon all of your purposes, you will have a problem, and it's called reputation. And reputation can damage share price as much as a faulty product. So what is the experience of leading from the chair? And perhaps if I start or finish with that question and throw it open to my colleagues, what is your experience of leading from the chair?
Thank you, Andrew, for this introduction. Now I'm welcoming Teofil. Teofil, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Unfortunately, I cannot see you. I don't know why. It's my problem. I try to connect. Now I'm connected by phone, but I can hear you. I don't know if you can see me or not.
No, we can't see you, unfortunately.
Okay.
Welcome and thank you for joining today.
Try to reconnect again. I don't know what the problem is.
Okay. Now, because you have thrown already the ball towards our distinguished guest speakers, I would encourage Radu and Valentin, until Teofil is reconnecting, to share their insights, talking about how is it to be a chair within important organizations.
Okay, thank you very much. I will try to reconnect.
Valentin, please.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I thought you're going to be first. Yeah, it's challenging. It's very tough because you have to handle a lot of issues and deal with an array of problems. And in the same time, you have to mitigate between various interests, between various personalities, while not losing focus on what's very, very important for the company and for its shareholders, meaning delivering value. And it was one question whether the board delivers value and how the board should deliver value and what's critical for a board in order to be able to deliver value. And from my past experience, I would say that there are a few critical factors that a board and its members have to have in order to deliver value. It is about the knowledge of of the board, of the members. It is about the leadership, and it is about the commitment and the engagement. Unless you have all these three ingredients, you are not going to be able to deliver value as a board for the company, and for the shareholders, for the stakeholders in a larger sense. Radu.
Thank you. Thank you. Andrew, I will go straight to your last questions about how do we see the qualities for being in chair. I don't think that it's mainly about smart. Clearly, you can't be stupid while you get at this point, but I think that yeah, you have to be able to take care of running the team. I think it has a lot with team building. I listened to your presentation. I saw a very strong focus on personal qualities of the chair. I think that I like to focus more on the perspective of a chairperson who's more like a team leader, more like a team player. When you're a chairman of a company, you're a part of the team, which is the board. You have to work closely with the people which are part of the team. And I think that it's more about your personal view. It's less about your personal view and more about building a team and promoting that common view of the team on the future of the company. So from that perspective, it's clearly a lot of politics involved, politics in a positive manner. Politics meaning being able to align the team towards a common objective. That means agreeing on the objective and working together to fulfill it. Is it tough? I don't know. I think it depends. From time to time, it can be tough. On the other hand, at least for me personally, it's quite a pleasant job, as I like very much what I'm doing. And I think that in terms of contribution, talking about CEO versus chairman and versus the board, I think it's more about short-term versus long-term perspective. I think that the CEO still has a very important role in the evolution of the company, and is taking care of the day-to-day job. On the other hand, at the board level, we have to be careful in setting up the strategy, in checking if we are on the right track, on the right course, and reviewing periodically the strategy and the purpose of it. So that would be from my side at this point, and I will pass the floor to Teo.
Teofil, can you hear us?
Heard you, but I don't know what I tried to connect in just a moment to see again. Okay, I'm telling you something about from my experience, but firstly, I would like to introduce myself. I have experience as CEO for 18 years in a company which I founded 20 years ago. So I saw how is in a company when you start from zero, from the scratch, having part-time job in the company, being engineer, accountant, sometimes a worker, and then being like operation chief, then CEO as the company is growing, and now as a chairman in a group of companies. When George called me 2 weeks ago to invite to the program in June, I saw two opportunities in two ways, in fact. One, of course, like everyone, to learn from you, from professors and from colleagues, from your expertise or your experience in big companies, listed companies, about corporate governance, boards, budgets, execution, so on. Same time, I want to share with you my experience in a Romanian company, like medium to large company with all the way. So that could be interesting for you to find how a company medium size with very young corporate governance is doing, because you could be interested in knowing better your partners, your potential targets, to understand the environment. Nowadays, because it's a different time, I see myself like a person who wants to bridging the gap, so that to put closer these two general things. One is, in general, people, the executives, research analysts, and people from finance wants to have a corporate governance by the book, being very frustrated and unhappy because the companies do not apply sometimes everything. Shareholders, founders can be frustrated at the same time, considering in their companies it's not totally applicable, all these rules or principles by the book. So that my role now is to try to reduce this gap. And more than in general, nowadays I try to put my experience in the company, knowing different departments, the same time trying to follow the budget or new budgets or the general rules for companies and for the boards. This is the idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Teofil. Valentin?
Yeah.
To jump in, because I remember our preparation session when you both were unstoppable, and now somehow you are a bit shy, so I would encourage to share.
Thank you very much. I'm not shy at all. I was just very, I paid attention to what Teofil just said, because definitely he has a different experience than us. He's coming from an entrepreneurial business that grew. At a certain moment in time, he needed to put rules and regulations and corporate governance, whilst we are coming from a different backgrounds, and we are leading companies that are listed, companies that are big and that do make an impact on the industries they are operating. So I was thinking that one question: which are the traits, which are the skills a chairperson has to have in order to really fulfill the expectations of from that position? And I was thinking that you have to be very critical of yourself and of the way you are thinking. You have to always put a question mark whether what you are thinking, what you are promoting, it is the right things to promote. It is the right way of approaching things. It is the right way of solving the issues. And in the same time, you have to challenge yourself, and you have to let yourself be challenged by the others, and by the others meaning either your colleagues from the board, or in a broader manner by your colleagues from the executive team. You also have, in my opinion, to be very to have the intellectual curiosity to go the extra mile, because you certainly might have a background that differs from the company you are chairing, yeah, in terms of line of business. And in order to contribute to the development of that respective company you are chairing as a chairperson, you have to have an understanding of the specifics of the business. You have to have an understanding on a broader scale about the industry the company it's operating. So unless you are able to have this intellectual curiosity to go the extra mile, I don't think you're going to contribute substantially to the strategic development of the company. Equally, from my point of view, you have to be a well-rounded person in terms of knowledge, in terms of competencies, and also in terms of personality, because you have to lead, and that's very important. And if we look around, there are various courses on leadership and so on and so forth. I personally think that you cannot train leadership. You either have it as a natural trait, or you don't have it. You may improve certain skills, you may improve knowledge, but in my opinion, you cannot train leadership.
Thank you, Valentin. Nadeem, the floor is yours.
Can I ask a question then? In terms of leadership, then the chairman's personality sort of becomes critical in that. You balance between in terms of what the board, managing the board side of it, and managing the executive side and the shareholders' perspective. So you've got three different scenarios there, and sometimes shareholders can be dominant in the board as well. So if you've got a dominant shareholder going one direction, you've got the executive going in a different direction. As a chairperson, what becomes critical in that? Do you then say this is the way we're doing it, or do you take a consensus view? What is it that the chairman's role becomes critical in that scenario?
Right. I think what the chair has to do, and what I'm trying always to do, is always make the different parts, the different stakeholders. By stakeholders, I understand the shareholders, I understand the colleagues from the board and the colleagues from the management, to always ask themselves what's in the best interest of the company. And then it's your role as a chairperson to try to mitigate the various interests in order to align them towards what's important for the company.
Radu, add your thoughts?
I would think, Nadeem, that it's not chairman versus CEO. Again, I think that you have the board who has to take care of the longer run, and to board, it represents the shareholders. So I wouldn't see how could we have a disagreement between the board and the shareholders. So on the other hand, again, if you look not as the chairman versus the CEO, but as the board with the CEO, I think that sometimes then there can be different views regarding the how the long-term purpose of the company can be realized between the board and the CEO. But I think that as a chairman, you have to find an alignment between these two views, because at the end of the day, execution, it's in the hands of the CEO. So we all know from experience that when there is disagreement between board and the CEO, no matter what the CEO states in the meetings, things are not going to happen. Things are going to take time. Projects are going to take longer than expected. So somehow we have to play a political game and to have all the people on board in order to make things happen. If there are disagreements, at least between the board and the CEO, there is very difficult to impose the board's view without having the CEO on board. I think that we can have disagreements at the board level. We don't have to take all the decisions by unanimity. there can be, I don't know, disagreements on various topics, but at the end of the day, we have to take a decision as a team, and we have to take care to be sure that we have the executive team on board to have these decisions implemented.
Mhm.
Just to challenge a bit Radu on that issue, there is a saying that goes like the board owns the culture, and the CEO and the executive team owns the strategy. So how do you mitigate these two issues?
I think that there was a very good statement. I don't know from whom comes, maybe from Buffett. I do not remember, saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So where you design when you design a strategy which is not, I don't know if aligned is the term. If you build a strategy which doesn't fit with the culture of the company you are part of, the perspective is not very positive. I would say that there are very low chances to have any strategy implemented if it's not a fit between the strategy and the cultural context of the company. And the effect of life is that it takes time to build a strategy. It takes time to build a culture. It is created in time in any company. Older the company, stronger the culture. And it takes also a very long time to change a culture. So while designing a strategy, because of course it's very easy to design a strategy, you have a strategy meeting, you spend 2 days discussing, and you come out with a strategy, in a formal way. If you don't look for alignment between strategy and the cultural context, there are very good chances to fail.
Yeah, so this mantra was stated by Peter Drucker, if I remember correctly, and I would add a bit more to the mantra that strategy eats culture eats strategy at breakfast. I would say that strategy eats culture eats strategy at breakfast, lunch, dinner, and sometimes even with the midnight snack.
Thank you both. We open the Q&A session by inviting Magda to ask a question. Magda, are you on?
Yes, I'm here. I think I posted the question already. What I see lately is kind of an anthropological shift of consumers, and even more the discussions around ESG companies and external rate of the return of the companies accelerated. So in the current context, as all these trends accelerate, may I ask you, how do you see your role in the boards, and how do you expect boards of the companies in general to adjust and to shift their strategies and business models towards these purposes?
Valentin?
Should be me. It very much depends on the industry your company is acting, because this what you've just mentioned, or your statement, is not necessarily valid for the company I am leading, which is acting in the energy field. Yeah, but what's very important, you have to have the ability to reassess your strategy with a forward-looking perspective. Yeah, a strategy is not set for a certain period of time and it cannot be changed. You have to have the ability to look towards your customers to see which are the changes in their behavior, and based on your findings to try to adapt the strategy to the new consumption patterns, to the new requirements of your customers.
But even in that respect, some of the ESG attributes are becoming more important in terms of social and the responsibility angle for organizations. They're having to promote it a bit more in terms of even finance companies are then thinking about the projects that they're investing in, whether they be energy or infrastructure. The social and environmental aspects are starting to become more prominent. Do you see that?
Right. Yeah, right. But again, environment, it's a very broad term. At the end of the day, you have to have the capacity to understand what's relevant for you as a company and where you have to change, where you have to adapt, where you have to rewrite your DNA in order to really make a difference in terms of what customers expect from you.
Mm-hmm.
But it's impossible to address and resolve each and every aspect that falls under the environmental issue.
Teofil, could you give us some insights from your perspective on the same question?
I think Teofil is dropped again. You can have Radu.
Yeah, I might jump in. I think, Magda, it's a very good question. I was reading just last year on CNBC a statement coming from the CEOs of 200 largest companies in US, stating that shareholders' value it's not longer their major objective. They were signaling the shift from shareholders' focus towards a larger perspective of stakeholders, focus on stakeholders from the management of the big companies. It's a very good trend, but on the other hand, it's a trend which goes against the whole legal structure of the corporate world. We know that at the end of the day, we all boards, CEOs, we are reporting to the shareholders, and we need the support for the shareholders for any strategy we are willing to implement. So I think that the transition from shareholders towards the largest view of stakeholders is going to be a long and difficult one. And when we talk about stakeholders and the interests of other parties than shareholders, yeah, we touch also this area of CSR, of environmental protection, which from a company perspective, all these approaches towards CSR and ESG comes with costs. The approaches are incurring costs to companies. So we have to find a balance between the scope of the business, the profitability of the business, which is required by the shareholders, which are appointing us in our positions, and the social responsibility of the company. And social responsibility, we have to say that on the longer run, that's linked with the long-term viability of the company, because I think that at least for the companies which are operating into a business-to-consumer environment, they are facing more and more scrutiny. The customers are looking at us not only as service providers, they are also valuing us based on our actions on the corporate and social responsibility area, environment protection. So on the longer run, corporate responsibility and shareholders' interests are aligned, but we have to work to promote this idea, to cultivate this idea in the relation with our shareholders.
Definitely, and if I may add something, I said that it's very important to pick those areas where you do make a significant contribution. And from my experience, you have to look at the DNA of the company you are chairing. You have to look at the core values and find those issues, those activities, those CSR activities, those aspects that can be linked to your core values, and in that very respect, you should try to make a difference. And if you make a difference, then it's going to impact the society, it's going to impact the stakeholders on a larger sense, and it's going to impact definitely the shareholders, because they are part of the environment as well. I mean, they no longer look only at the profits, but they should also look at the impact themselves are going to bring into the environment, into the society.
Thank you both. I would like to ask Leo to the question. We have questions on the chat box, but probably it's not very easy to hear them. So please, Leo, ask the question directly.
Thank you very much. I was listening very carefully about the part where we discussed about corporate culture and that type of thing. I think for the board to deliver value, it needs to be a functional board to exercise leadership and so on. And the board is responsible with the culture of the company, but which means the behaviors, the beliefs, and the values, and what it is to be done, and especially what people cannot do in a certain environment. And I see that each board has its own culture. So we're talking about the board, because the last thing we want is to have a non-functional board. So the question is, how do you build that board level culture, that level of trust and respect, so that as a body you convey the message to the executives and to the company and the stakeholders and shareholders, because that should be critical in the moving forward, I would say. What is how do you manage the process of sort of say teamwork in your boards? How do you align interests? How do you, I mean, it's a very fascinating and long topic, because we can enter into discussions about composition and gender and skills and that type of thing. But at cultural level, how do you make sure that sort of a board is one voice?
Andrew, may I kindly ask you to jump in the first with the answer? We can't hear you.
Thank you. I'm on mute. You may not be able to. First of all, should the board be a team? The board is a meeting point of interests. It could be shareholder interest, stakeholder interest. We've got the chairman, CEO, and usually the finance director on the board as well, plus the independent directors. So question number one, do you want to be a team? Or do you want to be a meeting point of interest where there is no issue that remains unattended to? And the priority is every issue facing this company should be attended to, should be aired, should be transparent, and should be discussed. And the person that orchestrates that is the chair. Secondly, for the board to add value and have that culture that you were talking about, statistically, at least from our studies, it's only about 30% or less of boards in the world achieve that. And our database is from boards in China, America, Romania, Ireland, you name it, even Saudi Arabia and Oman. And why is that the issue? Because still so many boards are focused on compliance. They've not balanced compliance with stewardship, mentoring with monitoring, understanding the business, enabling as well as making the difficult decisions, and legalizing the whole process through compliance measures. And that again comes down to the chair. What has made the critical difference, especially from the manager's point of view, that they respect the board and they respect the decisions made by the board that they wish to implement, it's when the board is in touch. The biggest complaint that I have heard from managers is that our board is out of touch. Nice people, well-intended people, in fact, a great team. but they don't know what's happening in terms of reality in the field. So if you take a board such as one of the big courier companies, Federal Express, they require their board members to have about 4 international visits per year. And they needn't be paid for by Federal Express, by the way. Certain board members belong to other boards. So one board member may be for another board in Singapore. Now you're in Singapore, could you please go to the Singapore General Office and see what's happening? And they require that without giving notice to the management. So you just turn up. And if you have a question, you will go through and work that question through as far as the whole Singapore General Management area is concerned. I went and spoke to the Singapore General Manager and I said, what is your experience of a board member turning up? And the man said to me, fantastic. I know for the first time that the issues I have will go directly to the board and they will not be, in a sense, tailored, edited. I know I now have direct communication. So if you can link what the board purpose is with what the company purpose is and what is competitive advantage with having realistically gathered evidence about the reality of how this company is working, I suspect we have a very productive board culture. Who creates that tension in the board that in fact is a positive tension is the chairman. And when the chairman is able to link the tension that's in the field and replicates that in the boardroom so that a realistic resolution can come out that management will respect, we have a board culture that I think has value.
Andrew, in that respect, then does chairman become critical in engaging board members towards a deep dive in the organisation, or is it an executive issue in terms of that deep dive comes to the board from the CEO, or should board members be going in and doing, as you say, find subsidiaries or different levels of the organisation?
Well, if we take companies such as Caterpillar, Anglo-American from South Africa, Origins, National Grid in the UK, the various chairmen there have made sure that the deep dive into the organization is the experience of the board member. So in Anglo-American, many board members had to experience what it was like to extract minerals from the ground, go in the lorries that took those minerals from place A to place B, look at what it felt like to be a mining person, a mining manager, and only then enter into the debate on the board. It's not that they didn't rely on the CEO, but the CEO cannot replicate the experience of what it's like to deal with uncomfortable problems. And it was recognized by the chair that until the board members experience what it was like at middle management levels to live through certain tensions, how could you have an effective decision made? Now, how many boards do that? You'd be surprised to hear relatively few. Most board meetings, from my experience, it's not intended, turn out to be committee meetings. The board members walk in, there are a series of papers, usually the papers are there on time, the numbers are reasonably accurate, but what is the challenge to those numbers? You cannot do that challenge until you've gone into the field to find out what the reality is. So what happens, we discuss those numbers, we reach a conclusion, and we walk away. It's a committee meeting. And that is probably one of the worst board meetings to have. Who allows that? The chair.
Andrew, if I may step in, because you asked the question, how many boards do that? Maybe to everyone's surprise, we did that, and we are doing this quite often. Because one thing I understood is you have to challenge what is being put in front of you as a board to decide upon.
Absolutely.
This is one critical aspect. The other aspect, you have to have an understanding of what's going on at the very bottom of the organization. And I personally went either alone or together with my board colleagues or with the CEO out in the field, visiting transformation stations, visiting various places, visiting the teams that are performing on the field and so on and so forth. And we ask questions towards the electricians towards any person we met, and we let them tell us which are their problems, what bothers them, what doesn't. So sometimes you don't need a filter between what's going on at the very bottom of the organization and what is being promoted at the very top of the organization, which is at the board level.
I agree.
What we've done, for example, we decided not to hold all our board meetings in the headquarters in Bucharest. So we are holding from time to time our board meetings in our subsidiaries. And besides the points we have on the agenda, we have a session whereby we invite the top management of the respective subsidiary, the middle management, sometimes even the representative of the workforce, and so on and so forth, in order for them not to perceive us as those geeks out in the clouds, being completely disconnected from the business, taking decisions based on something that is not real. And this proved to me and to my colleagues to be a very, very valuable approach with a lot of insights.
Very interesting, Valentin, very interesting. Teo, can I ask you, because you built up your own businesses?
Yeah. Firstly, what I would like to say is about the general issue between board and executives. Totally agree with what you said, Andrew, that they have to be in a team. It's perfect to play in a team together, but at the same time, we know that boards, based on the historical results and the future trends, want to take the maximum from the market for the company, so that the budgets or the targets negotiated with a CEO, appointing CEO, has to be realistic and achievable. Here could be a problem, a fight between to take as much as you can as a board in your strategy. You want to put high targets. Same time, because of the bonuses, CEOs could accept these targets even they are not happy or they cannot achieve this target just to help with this. From here could be some problems in the team between in the team's board and CEOs, having too high financial figures in the budget or like this. More than this, nowadays, when the history, company's history or industry history, last year industry of the company results, and more than this, the future trends are not clear. It's more difficult to keep the same budget as 3-4 months before. And more than this, we cannot see maybe more than a month forward what is going to happen. So that it's very, very important now to be close or closer this time with the executives than before.
I totally understand and sympathize with that.
Can I ask, in terms of then the board itself, in terms of the role of the chairman in building the board, so the type of people that you have in your as non-executive directors and as your CFO, and so the skill sets that you need around the board in terms of engagement with them for the strategy that you're looking to build ahead. What's the role of the chairman in that? How critical is that in terms of knowing which direction we want to go, which type of people we want on the board?
Teo, that'd be a good one for you.
Yes, I know. You mean about the background of the CEOs and the expertise of the CEOs. Depends very much about the company. If it's a big company, as the majority of companies has to be very educated CEO, for clear. I think not so important to be with a background in finance or in engineering. It's important to have expertise. It's important to have expertise, to have tools. I cannot say that I would like, even we are involved in engineering, in infrastructure, but of course, with expertise in the company and with expertise in industry, it's a very important.
Okay. I'm just wondering, Radu, with your relative recent appointment to chair, what's your view?
I'm having a little bit different perspective. That doesn't mean that I do not agree with Theo. I just say that I know it's a completely different story when you are working in a family-owned business and compared to when you are working into a listed company with a very diverse shareholding structure. In my case, working with public companies, and I think also in the case of Valentin in part, you have to work with what shareholders are giving to you. Of course, there is a process, you are in contact with the shareholders, you have a sort of influence or a sort of contribution to the build up of the board structure. But at the end of the day, you are working with the people which are sent in the board by the shareholders. So in this context, I would address your question, is the board a team or should it be? Or is this contradicting the fact that the board is representing a very diverse structure in terms of shareholders? And that goes straight back to Leo's question about trust. I think that team, there are different ways to define a team. And I think that board is not necessarily a team, meaning that all the people there have all the time the same objectives, because they are all representing different shareholders and different interests. But I think what's most important for a chairperson is to build trust among the team, to give people comfort that they can agree or disagree on different topics when they have different opinions. And of course, to be able to move forward the ship, even if you don't have full agreement for alignment on different topics. And that means that if you manage to build trust at the group level and to give people the comfort that you are taking the best decisions for the interest of the company, they will agree on moving forward, even if we might disagree on different points of time on different issues. And that's why, again, I think trust is the most important thing among a board. And of course, the most difficult to implement, Leo. I wouldn't be able to tell you explicitly how it is to build trust. It's about the person, it's about a lot of
I'm sure
things.
that you are a trustworthy person, and that's the good way to start.
Sorry?
Remain as you are, a trustworthy person.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I may add something to what just Radu said. One thing which I experienced, and I always try to make my colleagues aware, is that, of course, when they are promoted, they are voted to be part of the board, they are voted by certain shareholders, and the structure of the board you cannot control, and it's going to be the outcome of the voting at the end of the day. But before that, we ourselves established a certain board member profile, and we let each and every shareholder know about what we think would be a good fit in the board in order to have a functional board. This does not necessarily mean that all shareholders take that into consideration, but at least we have a guidance, yeah, to help shareholders promote persons that are going to fit the profile and that are going to have a significant contribution. Okay, then going back to what I've just said about being voted in by a certain shareholder. Obviously, when you come in, you come with a certain background, which is somehow influenced by the shareholders that has promoted you. But you have to always understand that by the moment you are part of the board, you are part of a team, and you have the same fiduciary duty towards all the shareholders, not only toward the shareholder that voted for you to be part of the board.
Can I ask Simona, you have a question about this which is related to this. Would you like to raise your question? Simona? She's asking, what is your recommendation regarding where you have a CEO who has a majority shareholder?
Yes, that was my question. And I'm glad Radu has brought into the discussion the structure of the shareholders and having different, I would not say necessarily interests, but priorities, I would say. Because in the end, you know, we all, or they all want companies to exist on the long run and have positive outcomes. And in the end, I believe it's a matter of priorities and different views on how we reach these goals. And I raised this, I would say it's sensitive issue when you have a listed company majority owned by the CEO and having also a board around him. What is your recommendation in terms of having these two functions linked, meaning the CEO is also the chair of the board, or it's better to have the chair of the board different than the CEO? And if this is the case, then how the board should lead toward the change of having a split in functions in this particular case? Thank you.
Simona, if I understood correctly, you are talking about a situation where you have a public company, but which has a majority shareholder, and you are asking my view on whether the CEO and the chairman position should be split or not, and also about the relation with between the executive chairman and the majority shareholder. That's correct?
Correct.
So I think that when we talk about the culture of the company, that refers also at the culture of the shareholders, especially when we are talking about the company which has a majority shareholder. Because it's clear that when you have a majority shareholder, that shareholder is going to affect significantly the culture of the company. Of course, it's his right, because ultimately the majority shareholder pays the price. If he makes mistakes, the company is going to go bankrupt or is going to lose money, and those are going to be the shareholders' money. So it's the right of the shareholders to take best decisions for the best decisions he thinks are needed for its company. So I think it's fully the decision of the shareholder whether it works with a board separate of the CEO position, or if he decides to use the president of the board as a member of the executive team. I think that there are no or a lot of pros and cons for both situations. I think that there is no best way of doing this. It can be done both ways, and I think a lot depends on how involved the shareholder is in the day-to-day business and in the strategic decisions of the company. If he lets the board doing its job and work for designing the strategy, and the shareholder limits its intervention at, I don't know, major strategic decisions, or you have a shareholder which wants to be there on a day-by-day basis and to be involved in everything's happening there.
May I challenge you on this view?
Sure.
My opinion is that the role of the board, it's also to challenge the CEO and to challenge him up to the point to ask for the split in having this function together, CEO and the chair of the board. Because otherwise, what is the reason or what is the contribution of the other shareholders being listed in the end?
Simona, might I challenge your point?
Yes, please.
At the end of the day, the board challenges the CEO when and if the shareholders are asking the board to challenge the CEO. If the shareholders are not asking the board to challenge the CEO, namely, for example, because we are talking about real life, we might have the shareholders involved in the decision regarding the CEO nomination. So we might have a CEO which was nominated at the shareholders level, and we might have a board which might really not be able to challenge the CEO because the shareholders do not want that, because the shareholder named the executive. So I think a lot depends on how shareholders view their role, the board's role, and the executive role. If the shareholders see things just like you, Simona, they are going to have a board which is going to challenge the CEO. If they are not going to see things like that, and this is possible, that we might have shareholders which might not want, which have full trust in the CEO and might not want to have a board challenging the CEO. And in this case, we are not going to have it, no matter how much do we want or not to see this happening. And I think that we go back to Theo said at the beginning of the discussion. Not everything what's written in the books applies in real life in every situation.
I can share from my, sorry.
Sorry, my understanding is, Radu, that in your opinion, the shareholders are also sitting at the table and in the board. I think they empowered the board members to defend the interest of the company and their interest, and not to be that much involved in this, and to receive from the board as such a feedback with regard to what is the best. You also mentioned earlier that the board itself, or not you, I think Valentin mentioned that the board is actually the one who proactively goes to the shareholders and raise the issue of the board composition, that meaning that they simply say we need this profile and that profile, and in this respect I think the board should also have the capability and the proactivity to go to the shareholders in the general meeting and say, look, I think it's better to have the two sittings split it because this and that. So I have, from this point of view, a different view, and I don't believe it's so it's good for the shareholders to sit on, you know, quote, on the table of the board and to be so much involved. Thank you. I close my.
Simona, I respect your view. I am on the view that shareholders always know what's better for themselves. I think that I'm not able to judge what's better for any shareholder in this world. For myself and for the Bucharest Stock Exchange, everything goes back to what Leo said, to trust. We are managing a market. We have to be sure. It's just like, I don't know, the market I will speak in Romanian, like Piața de Zarzavaturi in Bucharest, you know. We are operating this market. You have to be sure that it's a secure environment, that the buyers and the sellers are safe there, that there are no pickpockets in the market, that the products are best quality products, because this way we are going to have buyers and sellers flowing in, having trust in investing, in buying things, and of course letting them decide for themselves as long as they respect the rules.
Radu, may I add something?
Please, sure.
I was just listening very carefully to what you've just said, and I was thinking that if the CEO is directly nominated by a certain shareholder, then I see no role in having a board. I mean, the board is just going to be an appendix signing off and bearing the responsibility for something that he's not deciding upon. I mean, that's very damaging for the culture, for the company, from my point of view.
Hello.
I agree with you.
Sorry. Question, we have to move a bit further. One question comes from Bogdan Hayat.
I would like to,
yes,
if I can, I would like to say something on the point which was discussed, because I consider I have experience in that point, if you allow me.
Please do.
In my experience, I was CEO in my company, CEO with a board in my company, the same time the chairman of the board, and then chairman with CEOs, and the chairman with a board without CEOs in that board. So I saw, I would say, many combinations. I totally agree with Valentin, what he said about the dangerous position with a CEO with all the power and the board like an appendix. CEO and the board, the chairman, in fact, they have the same goal, to do the best for the company. But the question is for the long, medium, or short terms. So that here could appear problems in a company. For me, it was important when we had enough size, or when we were focused on the specific business, like engineering, or in a position when we decided to go abroad. So a CEO, when the company is quite small, I think could be CEO without board, or CEO with the board like advisor. But when the company is getting bigger and bigger and plays in other markets or in different industry, to me it's very important now CEO to be like by the book CEO, and the board like by the book board. Of course, more or less they can have relationship, close or not so close depend of the target or depend of the shareholders. But to me, a big company or a listed company has to have CEO and the board and the chairman, different person as CEO. Thank you.
Yeah, Ciprian speaking. May I add a view on this?
Please.
I observe that there are different opinions related to the subject. It's a nice subject indeed. Only I want to mention that there are good examples in the world with the companies that have the same person for both positions, as well extremely good examples with the companies that are have the split roles. So depends, this is important. However, what is important is the corporate governance in general, the framework of the corporate governance in general, that it's embedded in the company. And if you are looking to US market, you may see that usually CEO is the chairman and the company are doing very well. So it is a choice, but the CEO or the chairman is not the only one piece from the corporate governance. There are others, committees of the board, and that may help, may support the proper corporate governance. Thank you for.
Thank you. Can I
Carmen, you can ask a question, Carmen?
Yeah, well, I'm trying to ask Radu whether he wants to pick up the question or should we move forward?
Well, just to finish off the question of chairman CEO, as you've heard, it can go both ways. When you look at practice across the world, and I do have a case example of this, a better track record comes out when somebody starts their own business, it comes big, where they are CEO and shareholder, but you have an independent chair and board, by and large. I had example of this, and I had to persuade a particular billionaire that he needed a board. He was reluctant. It came along, and what was the interesting thing that was learned by this person who was 82% shareholder of a global company that had 450,000 employees? It was that his own management team did not challenge him. Because that person had become, he was very good, very able, but had become so dominant. So one thing the board did and the chairman did is they made a very clear understanding. With the CEO as shareholder, in terms of where the shares should go and which direction the company should go, the board could advise, add a bit more, but they had to respect the shareholder. In terms of the operationalization of the business, the chairman treated the CEO as a CEO. Fundamentally, are the plans on time? Are you doing this? Is your evidence good? How have you come to this conclusion about this merger and acquisition? On what evidence base? On what assumption? And what we found with this company was that they had gained such a prominent position in the US, they were not an American company, that they almost held monopoly in one market for about 2 years. They were so good at what they were doing. When I look back, if that CEO who was 82% shareholder had not created that independent board, they would not have got that final little touch, that extra bit that the person on their own could not get. So is the case that this 82% shareholder would have survived to this day? Yes, they would. Would they have reached such prominence without that independent input? No, they would not. So I think one lesson to take away from here, it's not whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. When you have talented people, that overwhelms all governance. It oversees all governance. It's how do you make that telling difference, that 1 or 2% difference that really is outstanding success as opposed to success. And the prescription seems to be, have a board with an independent chair and independent directors who will challenge you on what you are doing and why, but they respect you as shareholder.
So very true.
Thank you, Andrew. I just want to let everybody know we still have 15 minutes, so we should wrap up a bit in the direction of someone, maybe more question. We have noted there are several for another session, actually. In fact, there are so many. Nadeem and Andrew, question for you. How a good board chair will manage the relationship with the CEO during a crisis, when the CEO may have a different opinion on strategy and impact on long-term strategy approach? So I think we already have tackled a bit around that. If there is any final conclusion from any of you.
The only conclusion is a crisis such as the one now, or whichever other crisis, the crisis brings to the surface what was there before. It just brings it to the surface in a more dramatic way, which requires a more dramatic way of handling that particular dynamic. So if the tension between chair and CEO was a negative tension and it was not addressed before, in this crisis, you may have limited choices. One of the two may have to go. And why? Because the clarity on the purpose and the mission of the firm, which determines direction, if that is not shared, it cannot be quickly put together in a crisis. If what occurred before was a misunderstanding of roles, now is the time to talk that through. And may I say, one of the best practices between a chair and CEO is not to have, this is the role of the chair and that is the role of the CEO. And this was the finding from the 1980s, but it is a negotiated process. Some of the most successful companies, the chair and CEO, have sat together and delineated their roles according to the strategy they want to pursue, according to the impact they want to make, and according to the size, purpose, and nature of the firm that they want to have. Now, if the crisis brings that issue to the surface because they've not done it, excellent opportunity. But if the crisis brings to the surface such a difference of mindset that in a sense was kept underneath the surface before, then I think the decision has to be which one stays and which one goes.
But Andrew, you've also had situations where the board have often known about the crisis or the problem that's coming ahead, and they've seen that the impact is going to be there, and they haven't been able to address those issues. So then the role of the chair becomes critical in that. What would be the key elements of that for a chairperson to handle a situation? For example, we've got this COVID situation now. Then they will have seen, they're the first people to know in the organization that this is coming and this is a problem, and how are we going to handle it? What does the role of the chair be in that with the board and with the executives then?
In the COVID situation, it was not of the making of the company. In other situations where there is a crisis, it usually is the making of the company. It's not a national emergency. And every situation that I have seen for the last 40 to 50 years, right across the world, the board knew and the chairman knew. And I remember in one situation where my wife Nada and I had to get involved, there was no choice but to get rid of the chair and the board. It had got so bad. So what to do when everyone knows what the problem is, and we saw that in Royal Bank of Scotland, Halifax Bank of Scotland, Marconi. We go back even to last year, one or two of the crises that were there. The question is, what trust is there left in the chair? And I think that's the first question to address. Does the board and management, do the shareholders actually trust the chair to be able to see through this crisis? And if not, that has to be handled. If they do, then we can go on to other things. But where a crisis has occurred and nothing has been done in the past, is there sufficient trust in the chair to allow the chair to move forward?
Thank you, Andrew. I would encourage also our three distinguished guests to have an opinion about this last subject as a roundup of our session. Who'd like to start?
I may start. Andrew, I fully agree with you. And in addition to what you just mentioned, I think that for a company's long-term survival during a crisis, the more is the case during this COVID-19 crisis, which is, by the way, the first crisis that is humanly induced, not economically induced. The long-term survival of the company depends on some key aspects. One is the complementarity of the roles between the CEO and the chair. The second one, in my opinion, it should be the strategic alignment between the two. And last but not least, I would say very, very important, and you made that point, it is the chemistry between the chair and the CEO. Yeah, based on my experience, I had to understand that the success you have as a chair depends very much on how you are able to walk a very tight rope, yeah, of being either too involved in managing the issues or too remote in the strategies, in the company strategy execution.
How true?
And what's very important from my experience, because we are facing this crisis and I experienced that myself, it's very important to you as a chair to be available, to make yourself available, to have a continuous discussion with the CEO.
24 hours.
You have to be empathetic. You have to really use all communications tools possible. We as board decided together with the executive management team in order to have control of what's going to happen, in order to, and by the way, you have to take decisions with very little or no information at all. And you have to take decision on point because you have to react to something that is unfolding before your eyes.
Valentin, in that respect, George is asking about, in terms of your personal experiences, you've been in private sector and what's the difference between private sector and state-owned sector in terms of
I wouldn't say that it's a state-owned sector. We are a publicly listed company, majority private, with the state as the dominant or the key shareholder. But I think the difference, if we refer to how we react in crisis, is that much more flexibility and the more streamlined decision process you have in a private company, because you don't have to take into account the interests of all parties involved, being either the stakeholders, being the shareholders, being the media, being the general public, and so on and so forth. It's your company, it's a private company. You very well know that the impact of your actions is going to backfire you, but you assume that and go ahead. While in the case of a publicly listed company, you have to have or to take many more aspects into consideration.
Hmm.
And also what I think is very important, yeah, looking at the dynamics in the board and looking at the dynamics in the economy, it's very important that the interactions between the chairperson and the CEO, in order to establish which are the decision rules, which are the guidelines, which are the expectations, which are the agendas, and the way, yeah, the way you as a team communicates this strategy, it's very essential, it's very important, and could be a leading success factor for the organization during a crisis.
I'm just wondering, Nadeem and Carmen, I cannot see the emails coming in asking questions or making comments. And I wonder, just before we finish today, could you see if there's any particular themes that are coming out of all the contributions that colleagues have made? And perhaps us four could respond to those themes.
Yes, Andrew, we have already printed out the group chat. So there is a list of questions, very good, detailed.
Okay.
We'll pick it up later with you.
Okay.
So who'd like to move forward? Radu, Teofil?
Theo, do you take it or? Okay, I'll go with it. Andrew, I think that any crisis brings the necessity, or one of the characteristics of a crisis is that it happens usually fast. So that requires a fast response, fast decision making, and fast decision making requires alignment. or in order to have alignment, you have to have leadership, you have to have a board and a CEO which works closely together. As Theo said before, they are taking decisions on a maybe even weekly or monthly basis in the current environment. You have to decide in which direction do you move. So that makes the teamwork very, very important. So that's the point, I think. I think that each crisis brings the opportunity to eliminate these alignments, to misalignments, to clean up things within the company when you have, I don't know, obstacles in terms of, for example, communication and disagreement in terms of strategy between the executive team and the board. Regarding the current crisis, looking at the opportunities it brings, the most visible one is the migration from a paper-based economy towards the digital one. And just like you said, Andrew, that is a trend which was with us for at least 5-10 years. But it was needed a crisis like this to see, I know, the state stating publicly that they want a digital world, they want less human interaction between the state and the taxpayer, they want a digital connection, a better digital connection. We see that happening also in the private sector. So each crisis, including this one, I think brings opportunity, and for those which are going to able to take advantage of this, it's going to be a big step forward.
Also for you, Radu, you have one more question from George. As chairman of BVB, how do you see the value of more of the listed companies, private or state-owned, migrating to more corporate governance principles and not non-executive?
George, I'm 100% for this. As I said, I see Bucharest Stock Exchange as a market. I compared it to any other market, and I think that for any market to be competitive, it has to have a clean environment which to call customers in. So this translated in the Bucharest Stock Exchange terms, that means that we have to have companies and investors which are respecting the rules of corporate governance, which means in terms of communication between the company, the shareholders, all the stakeholders. And if we manage to improve this environment, we are going to have a successful stock exchange. And I think I'm looking at Theo, for example. He has a private company. There are a lot of people which are owning private companies, which are probably at some point looking at ways to develop their company, which are looking at Bucharest Stock Exchange as a partner in this journey. You have to be there, and we have to be trustful. You guys, you have to have trust in us that we are going to create and that we are creating and we are operating a clear, a transparent environment which is going to support you to grow your businesses. That's going to be the main argument which is going to keep us in business for the long run. And I think that's very, very important for the local environment, because not necessarily stated, but Bucharest Stock Exchange in Romania, it's only one. We have only one capital market, and this is the way an entrepreneur can finance its company. Our failure is going to have a huge impact on the whole local environment. Of course, our failure is not going to happen. We are moving forward, and I think that things are improving.
Thank you, Radu.
Thank you.
May we?
Yes, Andrew said about trust. How important is the trust this time? And then Valentin about the flexibility from both CEO and boards in their collaborations. And then Radu about the fast decisions and about the digitalization. I will tell you about what we applied what we are applying, in fact, now. We change a bit the strategy and put a new strategy like a cover, like a shelter over our budgets, reports, everything. We called this SDS 10, Strategy for Survival 10 months. And on this, we put priorities. In the first 2 months, the focus, and will continue, of course, will be the health of the employees, the cash flow, the health of the companies. And on this strategy, we try to adapt very quickly on the new environment and changes during these days. And we have level 1 sales with board and CEOs, and level 2 sales with the other directors. So we can change weekly if we see how we can adapt better to the environment. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have one more question for you from George as well. Assessing your journey from single-handed to non-executive your own company, do you find it useful and healthy for your company, and in what sense, talking about Teofil? We lost you, we don't hear you.
Could you repeat the question? Sorry.
As well, George has asked a question for you, has put a question for you. Assessing your journey from single-handed to non-exec chairman in your company, do you find it useful and healthy for your company, this journey, and in what sense?
The answer is yes, for sure. Because it's clear, you cannot increase the company if you are not able to do this. So you can a small or medium company doing very well in an organization with CEO as shareholder or with board or without board. Depends on the size of the company, but when you are a company maybe with more than 100 people, 100 employees, that could be very dangerous because you need help. You need more people to be involved. You need people with other expertise than yours. So my answer is, it's almost impossible to keep the company in your hand if you want to go bigger or to go as a multinational company.
Thank you, Teofil. We have to wrap it here. We are already 5 minutes past the time, and we are very grateful for your time, all of you. Especially, again, thank you, Andrew and Nadeem, for preparation of the meeting, for taking the time to have the talk with each of us. Thank you, Radu, Valentin, and Teofil for joining today and for your time. We know that you are very, very busy. Thank you all our participants, and we will make available the questions that you have asked here in the chat to Andrew and to Nadeem, and we will post them on our website and on LinkedIn just to have the answers later on, and you will be able to see the replies. So thank you, Vicky, for hosting and for the logistics. Thank you again, and we wish you a very pleasant afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Much enjoyed it, dear colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All the very best to you. Bye.
The same to you.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye.
To all. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.